sisters. This is Dr. William Snedlin coming to you with a little bit different sort of video from our usual fare. You know, if you've been following me for any amount of time, that the vast majority of the teachings we do here on Scripture, with occasionally talking about health issues. And that's what we're going to talk about today, but in a very personal way. And by that I mean this is about me. And I need to explain a couple things and also apologize. Those of you who follow me for a while, you know that we have been promoting a health program that was basically vegetarian or vegan. And as I was going through this, 5 years on this diet, which a vegan is someone who eats no animal products. And I thought this was healthy. And this is indeed what both most regular doctors, AMA type doctors, and also most naturopathic doctors like me will tell you, oh yeah, the more vegetables you eat, the better. And the less animal products you eat, the better. Well, something happened a couple of years ago. And basically, I started getting some significant GI issues. I won't go into very great detail with it, but basically it was very hard for anybody to diagnose. We know several very brilliant doctors, and they didn't really have an answer. But the point is, I started doing research about this because I felt an obligation both to myself and my family, but also to you folks ultimately, because even though, as I've said, most of the time we talk about just Bible issues, we do talk about health. And so anyhow, over the months, I was doing more and more research. I discovered a really large number of people who were very prominent vegans who, were on YouTube or whatever, and they were having health problems, kind of the same stuff I was having. And again, I'm not saying everybody was having these problems, but these were some very prominent people. And, you probably don't follow many of these sorts of things, but there was this one young woman, Elise Parker, who is extremely prominent on YouTube as a vegan person, and she basically got out of it and is now eating meat, and she feels a whole lot better. Similarly, there's a very famous athlete named Tim Scheif, I hope I pronounced that right, and he had to get out of veganism because he could no longer he was into this, I don't know what it's called, parkour or something like that, where you jump over buildings and fences and do all this really amazing stuff. He couldn't do it anymore. And so he started eating meat. And then there's also, probably most remarkably, there's a lady, Dr. Monica Hershoff. Sorry, I had to look at the name there. She's the daughter of a very prominent, one of the two guys that founded PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And she was raised vegan. And she went through some terrible times in her 20s and had excessive hormonal problems. And it basically ruined her life. And now she's very frank to say that. Now she basically eats carnivore-ish type diet. And at the very least is an omnivore. And of course her father's kind of upset with her, but there you go. You've got to do what's right for your own body. So here's my point. I started eating meat in, it would be almost a year and a half ago. And I started out very trepidatiously with, salmon. And then that wasn't quite doing it. I was still having the problems. And so finally, I started eating beef and chicken, and of course not pork because that's not kosher, but our diet consisted of beef and occasionally chicken and occasionally salmon. So, and I was doing a lot better on this. I am doing a lot better on this. And I just wanted to share this with you because I know some of you out there consider me an authority on health, and I'm, somewhat of that, but I was wrong on this, and at least for me. And of course, diet is a very personal choice. Everybody has to find their own way, and I would suggest, I'm not saying if you're a vegan you need to repent. because I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that, and let me say one thing by way of rabbit trail. People become vegans for several reasons. One is health, and one is that they, feel sorry for the animals, and of course the horrible conditions that they're in terms of the conventional meat and fishing industries, and they think it's more ethical. Well, and there are ways of answering that I don't want to get into right now, except to say that we do not get our meat from these big factory farms. We get only meat that has been beef that has been grass-fed, grass-finished, which means the cows basically lived in the pasture all the way up to the moment of their death. And they were treated very ethically. Not like these giant, large-scale feeding operations that are they're like a concentration camp for animals. Horrible, whether they're for calves or chickens or pigs or whatever. They're all terrible things, and they really are a blight on the landscape of America. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, a lot of people have been led to believe, really the vast majority of people, that meat is unhealthy. And that's not really true. Let me, because again, I'm kind of a, well known as a sort of quote unquote conspiracy kind of guy. And again, it seems like on every aspect of our lives, people are trying to mess around with our health, mess around with our freedom, all of these things. And with this, what happened was, and I'm not going to go into great depth in this, and I may do another video about it later if there's enough interest, but there was this guy named Ancel Keys back in the middle of the last century, and he claimed to be an expert in diet. Well, what happened was he did this study where he checked the correlation between people having high-fat, high-cholesterol diets and heart disease. And he came up with what was known as a 7-country study. And in that study, he showed evidence that there was a correlation in eating saturated fat and cholesterol and, coronary artery disease. Well, the problem is that it was basically a fake. The whole study was kind of fraudulent, on top of which he actually did, I think it was 21 countries, but he cherry-picked the data. And he threw out all the countries except for 7 that didn't fit his model, his theory. And so he produced this study, and he became like, the icon of the mid-20th century American health scene, and even into Europe. He was very influential, and it's too bad because at the time, nobody knew this guy was being funded by the sugar industry. Because at that time, now listen to this because it's going to be important. At that time, the sugar industry was beginning to be implicated for heart disease and for diabetes, gee, there's a shocker, and for several other health problems. And the soda pop people and the candy companies and all of these people that basically their product is run on sugar in one form or another, either high fructose corn syrup or some other thing, they funded this guy's study to take the spotlight off of sugar, and to put it on meat and cholesterol-rich foods. Now, what happened after that, in 1977, there was this Democratic Senator, George McGovern, who actually had run for president at one point. And he headed up this health study, and they used this Ancel Keys material along with other material to determine what has come to be known as the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, the food pyramid. And the trouble with that is the data was not even, most doctors were speaking out against it at the time in the late 70s. There were doctors that actually came and testified before Congress to say, this is garbage. There is no evidence for this. But you know how politics is. It didn't matter. They went ahead and so ever since then, this food pyramid with minor tweaks over the years, has been kind of the gospel, if you will, of the American medical establishment. But the problem is, it's based on a faulty foundation. It's based on these studies by Ansel Keys and of course the sugar people. So what actually came out later is, what happened is they discovered that two things happened in the 50s. Number one, because of Ansel Keys, people started eating less meat, less fat. Even things like, butter began to be replaced by margarine. And, we had Crisco, things like that were, quote unquote, they were vegetable oils, and so they were heart healthy. Actually, that's an absolute lie. The other thing that happened is that they began to introduce, and this is partly the Crisco thing, what are called polyunsaturated fatty acids. And these are really unhealthy. Excuse me, they're made from seeds, canola oil, soy oil, safflower oil, all of these different oils that you see that are made from seeds. And it turns out those are not healthy at all. But again, they were promoted because they weren't animal fats. And ever since then, when people are eating more and more of these seed oils, more and more things like margarine and, fake meat and all of these things, plus more and more sugar. Because as I think a lot of you know, we're eating a whole lot more sugar today than we were. I mean, I think the average young adult nowadays eats 150 pounds of sugar a year. That's like probably their body weight in many cases. And that's why we're seeing obesity. That's why we are seeing, there are kids born with type 2 diabetes. Now, there's always been what was called juvenile diabetes, which, is a real tragedy. But that has not so much to do with diet. But most of these kids and adults that have type 2 diabetes is because they've been eating these two things, these seed oils and lots of sugar. So just bear that in mind as you start thinking about, okay, what's in my diet? What am I eating maybe I shouldn't be? Because I would submit to you that if you put more healthy, organic, grass-fed, if you're talking about beef, grass-fed, grass-finished beef into your diet and had less of these processed foods, most all functional medicine doctors, naturopathic doctors, such as what I am, will agree that processed food is awful. If it comes in a box, don't eat it. Seriously. Because it's going to be full of all these things that I just mentioned. It's going to be full of sugar. It's going to be full of, and of course, gluten is another huge problem. And that's a whole nother discussion. And these polyunsaturated fatty acids. All of these things are very prominent in boxed foods like, Kraft macaroni and cheese or TV dinners or all of these different things they're very convenient, but at the expense of your health. So look at what you're eating. And, if there seems to be an interest in this, I'll do another couple of videos about this. But and I'm not saying that if you're a vegan, you're wrong, you're evil. I'm just saying what happened to me and what happened. I'll tell you, there are literally thousands of people, maybe even tens of thousands of former vegans showing up on different social media sites like Facebook. They have groups on Facebook of recovering vegans, if you will. It's just everywhere. And people more and more, even though the narrative, if you I'll tell you I'll tell you my own personal thing. I went to my doctor after a year of eating a high animal fat, high, cholesterol diet. And I told her that. And she did these blood tests and she was astonished. See, my blood work was actually better. My triglycerides were better. My cholesterol levels were better. Everything was better. It was already pretty good. But I've always been careful about this because I have a history of heart disease in my family. So apparently, And I'm not saying I'm the only one. I think there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are thriving on a meat-based diet where maybe they eat vegetables, maybe they don't. There are some that don't eat any because they have, allergy issues. They have food sensitivity issues. And I mean, there's this one young woman, Michaela Peterson, who very prominent now on YouTube, and she had a terrible background in her young life of, she had to have hip replacements because of horrible arthritis before she was 16. You imagine having a hip and an ankle, because her hip was shattering and her ankle was shattering. And they were pumping her full of drugs and steroids and, all that stuff, as you can imagine. And she got terribly depressed, did not have a life at all. Anyway, after a gradual thing of this, she came down to the point where she was just eliminating foods more and more and more and more and getting better. And finally she got to the point where she cut off all vegetables, and basically to this day I think she's only eating meat and salt and water. That's all she eats, and she's totally healed. So if you have mysterious ailments like this Dr. Monica Hershoff, she had a whole bunch of undiagnosable ailments that doctors were scratching their heads about, and you just eliminate gradually, because one thing most everybody agrees upon is that beef is one of the few foods that nobody hardly is allergic to. So if you just gradually pare away, if you have these different things like eczema or lupus, or people are getting over things like lupus and ALS and stuff like that just from going off vegetables. So to end this whole thing, I didn't mean to go this long, but there's a couple things I want to close with. One, people say vegetables are healthy, and to a degree that's true. And I know some of you are going to say, well, I know if you've heard my testimony, I had colon cancer in my 30s in, 1980. And I helped get off of that by drinking tons of green juice and eating tons of vegetables. And it basically cured it. And he will say, well, what about that? Well, here's the thing. What people don't understand is that vegetables are kind of like chemotherapy. And you might say, what? Well, here's the thing. Vegetables have, all of them, have toxic compounds in them, because that's how they protect themselves from insects or from other things, including us, that are trying to eat them. Because if you think about it, every living thing wants to stay alive. That's like, the prime directive, if you will. And animals can run away from things that want to eat them, or they have claws or teeth or whatever, or like a porcupine has its quills that can defend themselves. Plants can't run away. They're stuck in the ground. So over the years, the only thing they can do is develop these plant toxins. And it might surprise you to know that 98 or more % of the plants on Earth are toxic. You could flip that figure entirely around and determine that somewhere around 98, 97% of animals are not toxic. So I don't know if that means anything or not, but here's my point. When you have something like a cancerous colon or tumors or something like that, plants, like especially the real superstar plants like broccoli, and kale and things like that, they are full of these toxins, just like chemotherapy is a very toxic thing. But if you use these plants on a medicinal level for a brief period, just like you would use chemotherapy, they can help heal cancer, bowel disease, all sorts of things. Yes, they can. But the problem is, just like you wouldn't go and take chemotherapy for the rest of your life, you probably wouldn't want to eat plants for the rest of your life, because there is this phenomenon called hormesis in biology, and it basically means that that any organism that's stressed will become strengthened by that stress as long as the stress isn't too great. Just like if you go to the gym and lift weights, you stress your muscles and they grow. But if you go outside and try to lift your car, you're going to strain something and maybe even pull a joint out or something. You don't want to be doing it all the time. Nobody, goes to the gym 8 hours a day, 7 days a week and exercises the same muscles. Well, this hormetic effect from hormesis is what plants do. And they can be good for short-term things like what I did with my juicing. But for many people, to eat plants every day or to do juicing every day, there was a period where I was really doing a lot of that. And I didn't fare very well on it, I'll tell you. So anyway, this is just a long way of saying, look at your own situation. If you have some of these mysterious issues, whether it's autoimmune disorders, rashes, eczema, things like that, or even rheumatoid arthritis, which is one of the most painful autoimmune disorders. If you have any of these things, look into this. We're going to put a couple links below. And again, some of these people are extreme in what they're doing, some of them less so. But, if you're trying to save your life, how extreme do you want to be? So anyway, and you need to pray about these things. Because, and some people say, well, you used to quote a couple scriptures about being a vegan. And I said, yeah, I did. But then you can look at the other side of those scriptures. And again, maybe perhaps, willing, I'll put together a thing about the scriptural aspect of this. But it's quite obvious that for most of the history of Israel and down in the New Testament, the people of Elohim were eating meat. Passover was a commandment, for example. So anyway, that was longer than I wanted it to be, but I just thank you for listening to this. I know it's not our usual fare, but I wanted to be upfront with you. I wanted to be honest with you, and I would just encourage you to pray about these things, and especially if you have health problems, because whether it's gut issues or autoimmune things or whatever, pray. Seek the Father's wisdom in this, because I was kind of arrogant. I looked at all these people who were prominent vegetarians or vegans that were health gurus, and at the time they were all pretty healthy, but later on they all started dying early or getting sick or whatever, and I've belabored that enough. I just want you to know that we'll keep you posted on this to the degree that it seems appropriate, and I would ask your prayers, because this is a journey. We're all on a journey, both spiritually and health-wise. And we're all trying to find the best solution for us. For some of you, maybe you're thriving on a predominantly plant-based diet. And if so, great. But just kind of keep your finger on the pulse of where your body is and where it's going. And if some of you want to try the meat thing, that's great too. I would just strongly suggest that if you do, you stick to grass-fed, grass-finished beef, because it's both more ethical and it's also healthier. And okay, I'm just going to finish with a brief prayer. Father, this has been kind of a weird thing that I'm doing here to share these things, but I want people to know where I'm at in my own health journey and my own spiritual journey. And Father, I would just pray that if there are people out there who are struggling with these mysterious, undiagnosable health issues, that you would lead them and guide them by the power of your Ruach HaKodesh, your Holy Spirit, into the right diet for them, even if it seems kind of bizarre-like. And Father, I would also pray that you would help everybody to do all things to the glory of Elohim, that whatever they do, that they don't put junk in their body, that they don't, treat their body like a trash can, and throw a bunch of processed food and McDonald's and Burger King junk in their bodies, because that's the last thing anybody needs. Father, we just give you all the glory. We know that our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made, and we need your guidance and your wisdom about what is the best way to treat and maintain those bodies. So please, Father, lead us and guide us and direct us in these things. And we thank you for it, and we praise you for it. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, Amen. So, in any event, if you're finding this video helpful, please subscribe and share it. And also, please pray about supporting the work of our ministry, which this is, again, kind of an exceptional video. But we really appreciate your prayers and support. You can do that through our website with PayPal, and we also have the text to give feature now, and you can see the number down below. So thank you very much for listening, and may you be richly blessed in all things. In Yeshua HaMashiach. Shalom, shalom.